Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the program. Today I got some more biblical archaeology for you. The title reads, Biblical War Revealed on 2,800-Year-Old Stone Altar. So again, this altar reveals new details about a rebellion against the kingdom of Israel by the ancient kingdom of Moab. And if you guys know about the Mesha Stela, basically Mesha was, or Mesha, however you want to pronounce it, was this stone altar discovered in the 1860s that described this uprising, not really uprising, but this conflict between the kingdom of Moab and the kingdom of Israel. At the time, Israel was demanding all kinds of tribute from the kingdom of Moab. So Mesha was the king of Moab at the time, and then he created this stela as basically as to commemorate this victory over their Israeli or Israelite oppressors. So they find this new 2,800-year-old inscribed stone altar found within a Moabite sanctuary in the ancient city of Atarat in Jordan. And again, this ancient city is now called Kirbat Atarus, which is again this city in West Jordan. And that is highly speculated to be the biblical Atarat. Just to fill you guys in some of the details, Atarat was a city that was founded by the children of Gad, which again, Gad refers to the 12, one of the 12 tribes of lost tribes of Israel. And when after Exodus, they went over and they settled on the eastern part of the Dead Sea. And that became where they settled, and Atarat was allegedly started there, along with a few other villages, and which later became cities. And here's a map here that gives you guys a little bit more context so you know what I'm talking about. So here's the kingdom of Israel. And again, this is all based on biblical writings and historical writings and some things that were unearthed in archaeology. And so this is like a think of it as like a theoretical map. This isn't exact. And again, this is based on descriptions and certain archaeological finds. So you have the kingdom of Aram, Damascus, and the Phoenician states up here. And then you have the kingdom of Ammon and Moab to the east. And then Israel and Judah at this time were split. And then you have the Philistine states to the west. And then the Arubu tribes and the kingdom of Edom on the south, and the southeast are the Nabathu tribes. So with this in mind, let's continue. So the altar bears two inscriptions. The words are in the Moabite language and script, while the numerals in the inscriptions are in hieratic and Egyptian writing system. So hieratic goes back to about 3,300 BC. And hieratic was used by the priest class, so it makes a lot of sense that the numerals were inherited by the people using the Moabite language. And the Moabite language itself derives from, it's in the Canaan language family, which is an ancient Semitic language system that was spoken in the area here. So again, they had their own. The Moabite was its own writing system. The scribes there were well versed in not only writing it but also using it in everyday life, and it was a pretty sophisticated system and it was by no means rudimentary. It's very comparable to ancient Hebrew. The altar appears to date to a time after Mesha, king of Moab, successfully rebelled against the kingdom of Israel and conquered Atarat, a city that the kingdom of Israel had controlled at the time. And at this time already, Israel had already broken into two. Remember, this is around 800, 900 BC, around the 9th century BC, that this is all going down. So if you know your biblical history, this is about a few hundred years after the kingdom of David or Israel was established. The Hebrew Bible mentions a rebellion, saying that before Mesha rebelled, Moab had to give Israel a yearly tribute of thousands of lambs and a vast amount of wool. So the success of the rebellion was a big deal, and the Mesha Stele it was a big enough deal for the king to create a stone inscription of it commemorating the victory. So now with this with this new altar with the two inscriptions that we're talking about, coupled with the Misha Stela from 1868 in Dibon, Jordan. Now we have two separate archaeological finds that are corroborating the same event in history. So that counts for something. It's not, to me anyway, it's not speculation. There are now two sites plus a bunch of scripture, like the Book of Numbers. It's mentioned, and the two, and it's mentioned twice in Joshua. So again, there's a lot of different sources that mention a similar event in history. One of the two inscriptions written on the altar appears to describe bronze that was plundered after the capture of Ataroth. Quote, one might speculate that quantities of bronze looted from the conquered city of Ataroth at some later date were presented as an offering at the shrine and recorded on this altar, the researchers wrote in the journal article. The second inscription on the altar is fragmentary and harder to understand. Parts of it, again, they find fragments of it. Some of it is just completely gone. 4,000 foreign men were scattered and abandoned in great number. And another part of the inscription mentions the desolate city, which you can only assume could be Ataroth. Much remains unclear about this inscription, the researchers wrote, noting that this inscription may discuss events that occurred during Misha's rebellion against Israel and the capture of Ataroth. So it could, I mean, there are stuff missing from the second inscription, but the fact that the first inscription is a lot more intact, coupled with the Misha Stela, you don't want to make any assumptions, but it's pretty safe to say that something happened in Ataroth, and something happened between these two groups. I don't think it was made up. I don't think it's an allegory for something else, although I guess that is a possibility. Some biblical clues here. The inscribed altar provides confirmation that the Moabites succeeded in taking over Ataroth. The altar shows that 2,800 years ago, the Moabites had skilled scribes who used their own script. And if we just look at the map here, it does make sense that these people, again, Moabite derives from a type of Phoenician writing system, so they're all related in some way. The Semitic, ancient Semitic writing system. So again, you can just tell if you follow linguistics and look at the maps, the pattern is obvious that people who live near each other are going to have similar spoken language and writing systems, of course. So the inscriptions on the altar are the earliest evidence we have so far for a distinctive Moabite script. And remember, guys, this is all before Babylon takes over everybody, about a couple hundred years after this. And when Babylon took over everything in this region, it's pretty obvious what happens next. The languages either become extinct or are no longer in use as much, although the hieratic script was still used in the 2nd century BC by some of the Greeks, just because of how advanced it was and how widespread it was in its heyday, because it had been around since the 33rd or 33rd century BC. So that's a long time for a script that features numerals to be around. So it's kind of understandable that hieratic stuck around for as long as it did. But when Babylon came and just steamrolled everything, that was pretty much the end of a lot of that ancient Hebrew and all that stuff being written down. And it does make sense that soon after the Babylonians took over Israel and most of Judah, a lot of the scholars went into hiding, and that's when their oral tradition started to be written down and hidden, and they started making secret societies and keeping esoteric knowledge and all that stuff. The Essene Brotherhood is a great example of that. They're the ones responsible for the Dead Sea Scrolls and all of that stuff, and in Qumran and all these like sophisticated networks of caves, and God knows how old those things are. They must have known about that network, and there's probably a map of it somewhere for them to have hidden in there and escaped being stamped out. Their culture, they narrowly avoided being stamped out by the Babylonians, and even with the Romans later on, their work still survived. Rolston told Live Science, noting that the inscription discovered in 1868 used the Hebrew script to write the Moabite language. So that's a very interesting detail as well. The Hebrew, usually, if you've heard the term, the history is written by the victors. Well, the Hebrew script, the fact that they use the Hebrew script to write the Moabite language is kind of clues you in onto who had hegemony during that time. So even though the kingdom of Moab won that battle, and they didn't have to pay tribute after that, they may not have won the war, so to speak, because as I just mentioned, the Babylonians came in and just swept through the area, and the Scythians as well, which again they also were on the horizon during this time. Not long after this, they came in. Ancient Moab had some gifted scribes as well. I mentioned that earlier. And that's pretty much it for this article. I thought it was really interesting. I've been on like a biblical archaeological kick lately just because so much has come out. I think it's really interesting, even though a lot of this stuff, in order to have like a background in this, you need to be pretty up to date on your scripture. And you don't have to be religious to read the scripture, by the way. I'm not a religious zealot or anything. I'm just fascinated with ancient stories like written works like in the Torah, the Talmud, the Old Testament. All of these ancient writings are now being corroborated in the archaeological record, and that to me is fascinating. So let me know what you guys think about this. I'll have the link in the description, and I'll talk to you guys later.